So today's daf is daf Lamed Gimel. On Lamed Gimel Lamed Aleph, we got down to Rabbi Eliezer Omer. That's where we stopped. So that's approximately, say, rounding it off to about 15 lines down from the top. And the discussion here is going to be about Eidim Zomimim. We said that Eidim Zomimim, according to the Rabbanan Shita, is an exception to the rule. Normally, we would say that Malchus knocks off Mammon, but here it goes the reverse. And when the Torah says, "Vasisam lo kasher zomam lasos liyachiv," and you testified falsely against Reuven that he's chayav 200 zuz to Shimon, you have to pay Reuven 200 zuz, and therefore you're exempt from Malchus. And now the Gemara is going to quote another opinion on this issue. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Eidim zomimim mamona michalme umilke lo loki. The reason why Eidim zomimim will pay asher zomam and they'll be exempt from Malchus is mishum gelav b'nei hasronin. It's not because they're really chayav Malchus and the momo knocks off the Malchus, but rather not chayav Malchus at all, because the precondition for a chayav Malchus, for violating any law in the Torah like Yelosana, is hasra. And Eidim Zomimim did not get a hasra. And the Gemara is going to analyze this in the name of Rava. When would we give them a hasra and exclude every possible time period in which we could give them a hasra? So Memela, it comes out that according to Rabbi Eliezer, it's not the pshat that we understood that the Mammon knocks off the Malchus, but here in Eidim Zomim there is no Malchus, and there cannot be Malchus because of the absence of hasra. Omar Rava Teda. Rava is going to now analyze why it's impossible in the case of Eidim Zomimim to give a hasra. Isrei Bahu Emas. Let's go through all the possibilities and exclude them. At what point in time are we going to warn the Eidim not to testify falsely? Nisri Bahu Meikara. If when they walk into Bezdin and they're about to give their testimony, that's called Meikara, Amri Istalayan. They're going to say that by the time they got around to give their testimony, because there was a whole period of time between when they started and they entered into Bezdin until they actually testified. And as a matter of fact, we'll see that even after their testimony, we still give them a short period of time in which they could rescind their aid. So there's a long period of time. Ishtalim, they're going to say, we forgot the Asra. And this is a basic principle in Asra. It's clarified by the Gemara in Masechet Makis, that Asra has to be over le'averes halav. It has to be immediately before, almost attached to the averes halav. If a period of shihui of zman passes by between the Asra and the violation of the Asra, then they could always say, we forgot the Asra. Now, again, in the Lumdisha world of abstract analysis, I don't believe that we really think that they're correct by saying we forgot the Hasra. But the fact that they could theoretically claim they forgot the Hasra proves that this Hasra was not connected to the Averes Halab. The Maisa Avera has to have a Hasra. The Hasra has to be attached to the Maisa Avera. So, for example, if let's say Aidan would give you a Hasra today for an Avera tomorrow, or they give you a Hasra today for an Avera that you're going to commit in a month's time. Obviously, that is a very extreme case in which there's no siruf, there's no connection between the Hasra and the Maisa Avera. The Gemara is saying that in the case of Aidan, when they come in to first testify, and Bezdin is going to clarify whether Roy Lahaid, Bezdin are going to investigate whether they are Ketanim or Gdolim, whether they're Psulim or not. This is going to be a whole procedure. By the time they get around to do the Avera, if they testify falsely, they could claim they forgot their Hasra. But now let's go to the other option. Nisru Bahu B'Chas Maisa. Why don't we give them Hasra just as they're about to start their Eidos, not when they first came in? Gemara says, Parshe v'lo mishadi. You're going to undermine the entire process of Edus, the entire entity of Edus, because if you're going to warn witnesses that if two other witnesses are going to come in and say, Manu Yisem, you're going to be killed, they're not going to want to give their Edus. As we say in Hebrew, why should I get involved in Edus? Again, the Torah commands me to get involved in Edus, but why would I want to put my life on the line such that any two Yankel barrels will come along and say Manu Yisem, and then basically is going to take us out to the base Askila? I'm not going to want to give Asra. Nisu Basof. Well, there's a third possibility. Why don't we give them Asra after their Edus? So you'll ask, well, what meaning and what significance could that have? They've already testified. The answer is we have a halacha called Toch Kidei Dibur, which means that they can still rescind their edus. The Gemara doesn't know that yet. The Gemara says, "My dahava it's already too late. You can't give them asra after they've done the affair, they've implemented the affair, they gave their edus." And the Gemara says, "Maskif le'abai v'nisri behu toch kidei dibur." And if it's toch kidei dibur, after they've given their edus, then that hasra is chal, and we warn them that if you're perjuring yourself, then you better rescind your edus, and you could pull it out and cancel your edus. Toch kidei dibur, the time that it takes to say Shalom Alecha Rabbi Umori. So now, in the light of Abai's attack, we have to come up with another explanation as to why Rabbi Lezer does away with Hasra in the case of Edom Zomim. But first, what the Gemara is going to do is, before it defends Rabbi Eliezer, the Gemara is going to attack Rabbi Eliezer on a second count. In addition to Abaye's objection to Rabbi Eliezer, the way Rav explained Rabbi Eliezer, Maskef lo Ravacha Bered Rav Ikov and Nisrei Behu Meikara, Benerames Behu Remuse. Now, let me give a little background to the psychology of the Gemara. The Gemara is saying the following. There are two types of hasra in the context of instilling fear of the Lord in the hearts of the Eidim, to the extent to which they're too inhibited to want to give their edus. You can break down hasra into two categories. There's what's called a hasra gemura, and then there's called a hasra raka, so to speak, a featherweight hasra. And the Gemara thinks that if you begin with a real hasra, which is called hasra gemura, which will instill the fear of the Lord into the Eidim, then you could connect that with hasra raka, a lightweight hasra, which would not instill the fear of the Lord, and you can connect the two and accomplish two things at the same time. This is the logic of Rav Ach. Rav Ach is saying, when they first come into Bezdin, hit them with the whole kitchen sink, with the whole gamut of the asra. Tell them that if they perjure them, if they perjure themselves, they might get, the capital punishment. By the time they get around to Edus, they've calmed down a little bit. Of course, we have the problem. Then in order to be mitzaref the asra to the Ma'is Haver, you need a proximity in time, because otherwise they'll say they forgot the asra. What we'll do is we'll give them a remiza, like as if to say, do you remember what we spoke about earlier? But at this point, they're already in the thrust and the throes of the edus, and they're no longer overwhelmed by the fear of the original harsh hasra gemura. Right? Then the Gemara says, Adar Omar Abai lav miltzi diamri. Now at this point, Abai rethinks his argument about giving a hasra to the Eidim after they gave their edus toch kidei dibur, and he says the following: I have another reason why Eidim Zomimim do not get asra. Eidim Zomimim are punished under the law of Kasha Zoma. What did they want to do to the Nidon? And we have to duplicate exactly what they had in mind to do the Nidon, and, so to speak, push it back onto them. Well, when they testified against the Nidon, and again, we're talking about Edom Zomim, falsely, that Reuven killed Shimon, and therefore Reuven should be killed, they didn't give Reuven a Hasra because the whole thing didn't happen. Esau kedaited Edom Zomim Tzrichim Hasra, lo masrinim bahu, lo katlina bahu, we cannot kill the Edom unless there was Hasra. Then Mika Midi, this is going to undermine the whole mechanism of Kasha Zoma. Mika Midi, the inu boy katil below Asra. They wanted to kill Reuven, the Nidon, without Asra. They didn't want Reuven. The whole story is a made-up story. The inu boy Asra, but we're not going to punish them unless they had Asra. You cannot fulfill the Vasisim law in which you rebound off the Nidon back to the Edom. And in the Nidon's case, there was no Asra. And yet, you're going to insist that the Edom themselves have Asra. It can't be. Maskif law, now the Gemara objects to Abaye's reformulation. Rav Sama Breder of Yomi Alamiyato. According to your logic, that in order to fulfill Kasher Zomam, you have to impose a chiyuv on the Edom even in the absence of Asra. Ben Grusha ben Chalutza, the lo kasher zomam, lo mi kasher zomam komis Rabbi, the boy Asra. Abai, you're basically saying that fundamentally we should apply the requirement of Asra to Edom Zomim the way we require it for any punishment that business is going to beat out to a violate. The only problem is kasher zomam. What about a case where Edom perjure themselves with a false testimony, but we're going to punish them under a different law, not under the law of Kasher Zoma. And that's the case at the beginning of Masechet Makos called Ben Grusha ben Chalutza. The Gemara derives from Tzukim, Vasisim lo v'lo l'saro, and therefore Ben Grusha ben Chalutza who are chalalim, and they passel their children, b'toras chalalim, there's no din of Kasher Zoma. In fact, the reason why we give Malchus, Edom Zomimim, who falsely testified about so-and-so that he's a Ben Grusha ben Chalutza, is because of the halacha of Losana Briachet Shoker, not because of Kasher Zoma. And therefore, according to your logic, Abai, there should be Asra. Before the Edom testify on a Ben Grusha ben Chalutza, we should have to give them Asra to warn them that if they turn out to be Edom Zomim, we'll give them Malchus. And that's going to be with Asra, because Abai says fundamentally we cannot punish the Edom without Asra. The only difference is the Kasher Zoma. But here in the case of Ben Grusha ben Chalutza, we're not operating with the mechanics of Kasher Zoma. More answers on my crop. The pasuk Mishpat Echad Yelakulchem is going to teach me. Let's just see where the pasuk is. Vayikra Chaf Dalet is going to teach me that all Edom Zomim, whenever we find out that the Edom purged themselves because they weren't there at the time, they were with the other Edom Amazimim in a different place. In all those cases, the Torah says Mishpat Echad Yelachem. The law has to be uniform for all cases, and since in the case of Stam Edom Zomim, not the case of Ben Grusha ben Chalutza, the Torah says we mete out the punishment to the Edom even in the absence of Asra. That same rule will apply even in the case of Ben Grusha ben Chalutza. Okay. Now, Rav Shisha is going to go back to the Gemara Daf Lamed Beis. The Gemara said there that Achovel Bechavero, the Torah says, Shifto Yitain V'Rapa Yirapi, to teach me that the Chovel pays a monetary compensation to the Nechbal. And Rabbi Yochanan pointed out that he doesn't get Malchus. And this is an exception to the rule of Loka Veina Mishalim, and here it's Mishalim Veina Loka. Rav Shisha has a different opinion. Shisha breder of Idiomar Chovel b'chaver nami mamonu mishalim milkalo lochi mihoch. The reason why, in the case of Chovel, the mammon is to be paid from the chovel to the nechmal, and we undermine the malchus, it's for a different reason. And it's derived from the parsha of Ason Yeason. In Parshas Mishpatim, the Torah speaks about a battle, a boxing match between Reuven and Shimon. And Reuven tried to kill Shimon, and instead he killed, or we'll see whether he killed or not, that's up in the air, a pregnant woman. Bang. And the Torah says, Amar Abelazar, matzus is the same as in Hebrew a mariva, shebemisa kosim. In other words, Reuven, when he lifted his hand to hit Shimon, he tried to kill Shimon. And how do I know this? Says Rav Shisha, because the pasuk says the ksivia son yiyeh v'nasato nefesh tachas nefesh. That if she dies, the Isha Hara, then we will put Reuven to death. Now, this enters into a sugya that we touched on in the past called Niskavin Laro Gezev Harges Chavera. And we're holding now, according to Rav Shisha, that you're chayv. If you had kavanah of Ritzicha, even if you killed the wrong person, we put you to death. But in any event, the Gemara is going to now prove that we're talking about a case where there was asra, because otherwise, how could it be nefesh tachas nefesh if in fact this Isha Hara dies? So certainly he had asra, which by the way is a little bit strange when you read the psukim al pi pshuto shel mikra. It doesn't sound like he had asra. I mean, it says ki yinatzu anoshim. I mean, there's a battle going. Oh, stop the battle for a minute. I want to give you asra. It's a little bit strange, but it has to be that there was asra, because otherwise, how can we say nefesh achas nefesh? We put him to death. And now comes along Rav Shesha with a new principle. The asra that we gave Reuven, which is the basis upon which we're going to put Reuven to death if he actually killed the Isha. That asra could serve a double function. It could serve as asra for a condemnation for capital punishment, and at the same time, if found guilty, the asra will also serve a function as asra for malchus. And that's called in the Lashon Hashas, Musr l'davar chamor having Musr l'davar kal. Once we gave Masra that if as a result of this hakah, he might be chayav misa, then inherent in that Asra is that if she doesn't die, then he'll be chayav malchus for violating the Isur of Pen Yosef when a person is makes chavero. Now let's see what's going to happen. If she survives, then the Torah says that he pays the Mei Vlados as a chovel. But he already had Asra, which, according to the logic of Rav Shisha, covers him even for Malchus. Amar Achmana v'lo ason, in event that she doesn't die, she survives. He's not chayav misa because he didn't murder her. Is anosh ye'anich, means he's going to have to pay Dmei Vlados. You see, clearly says Rav Shisha that hachovel b'chavero, even though he should be chayav malchus for violating Pen Yosef, and he got asra in that vein, nevertheless he pays Dmei Vlados. So we see the principle of mishalim ve'ino loka. So we're not going to derive it as Rabbi Yochanan had derived it from the fact that the Torah says Tifto Yitain v'Rapi Rapi, the parish of Chovil, but rather we'll go to the parish of Ki Notzu Anoshim B'Nogfu Ishahara, and there it says in Lo Yeh Ason Anoshi Anech, and the Anoshi Anech is referring to a financial payment, a compensation for Dmei Vlados, despite the fact that he had Asra. But again, all this is predicated on the principle that Musul Davar Chomer have a Musul Davar Kal, and that's what the Gemara is going to now attack. Maskif Lor of Shesha something. How do you know that Musul Davar Chomer have a Musul Davar Kal? Dilma Lo Havi. No, you gave Masra for one particular owner. Forget about whether it's Kal, whether it's Chomur. You told him that he's going to be put to death. He never heard, the violator never heard the word Malchus. And therefore, we're not going to say that Musul Davar Chomur is Musul Davar Kal. And therefore, the Torah says that he pays Mammon for Dmei Vlados. That's because there was no Asra for Malchus. There was Asra for Misa for sure, because it says that if she dies, we put him to death. But he never got Asra for Malchus. And if he never got Asra for Malchus, there's no Malchus, and that's why he pays Dmei Vlados. But as a general rule, if we would have given him Asra for Malchus, then he would not pay the Dmei Vlados. Furthermore, Rav Ashi objects to Rav Shisha, and he says, Imtim Salomer, I will grant you that Musul Davar Chamur Havi. Havi means having Musul Davar Chamur. But now you're working with the premise, which you and I don't think would ever question in a million years, that Misa is Chamur and Malchus is Kal, right? Who would want Malchus? Who would want Misa when he could get away with Malchus? Correct? The Gemara says, Mimai de Misa Chamur. Now we turn to Daf Lamed Gimel Amid Beis.